Welcome back to the Disruptors Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Johnson. Professional service firms have undergone dramatic shifts in the last 10 years, and many are predicting complete disruption in the next 20. As automation, broader access to information, and other trends converge, smart professional services firms are looking for ways to aggressively transform themselves. Perhaps one of the more ambitious firms in this regard is KPMG. And my guest today is Fiona Grandi, National Managing Partner for Innovation and Enterprise Solutions at KPMG. And in this fascinating discussion, we discuss how KPMG organizes itself internally to pursue innovation initiatives, how they embrace a bottoms-up approach to surfacing and executing on ideas, the impact things like automation will have on professional services in the future, and much more. Full disclosure, KPMG has been a client of Digital Intent in the past, and we've been able to see firsthand how Fiona's team thinks about enabling consultants to use technology to deliver better work. And after seeing our team interact with theirs, it was really fun for me to hear directly from Fiona on the why behind what they do and where she sees them heading. Anyways, a fascinating conversation for me, and I think you'll get a ton of practical value out of it as well. And with that, let's go to Fiona. Okay, Fiona, thank you so much for being here. Why don't we start with your role and maybe your mandate at KPMG? What's your group kind of charged with doing? How do you spend your time?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean, for talking with me. I'm the National Managing Partner of a group at KPMG that's called Innovation and Enterprise Solutions, which is a lot of big words, but really what it means is that I have a very fun job and that I get to lead our research and development function at a national level. The cool thing at KPMG is that innovation is defined as one of the firm's strategic objectives, right? And so it's really, our mandate is set by our CEO and our executive committee. So that means innovation is directly tied to our growth, our brand, our culture, trying to deliver excellent client service. It's tied into all of those other things at the very top level. So I have a national team in all parts of the country, and we do things like research, a lot of development, solution development, a lot of education of our professionals and partners at large. And then we do quite a bit of enablement, trying to bring what has been built into the marketplace. So I have a pretty cool job.
One of the things that you've talked about before in some of the other talks that you've given is this idea of sort of extending from the core. So taking what you're best at rather than just completely doing sort of new to the world, blue oceany types of things, that there's a ton of value in taking what you're already good at and finding more ways to profit from that. Are there any particular approaches to that you've found to be particularly effective, whether that's pursuing new segments with existing service offerings or, layering complementary products in? I would imagine there's a ton of ways that you can add value for clients and with services that you already have. How do you think about sort of extending the core?
Yeah, I think that it's important for companies to stick to what they do best, but innovate around maybe the ways of which they do things. I think that's really where our network comes in and is super important. There's been a lot of things that we've done where we've had the best domain expertise. If you think about it, there's not a Fortune 500 business that we don't understand because we serve every one of them in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is companies approach us all the time. We've got a new product, we've got a new angle to attack the market. And, often I think we have to sort of turn those away and think about where we can leverage our assets, which really comes from our people. So it's that domain expertise, it's our business understanding. And some of the best success that we've had is when we've partnered that up with the really excellent big tech skills, and then we can build something really cool together.
Yeah, it seems like it would be really easy. I mean, especially in an organization like yours where you have such broad exposure to client problems, to basically every industry, as you mentioned. It seems like it would be really easy to do things that seem 1 or 2% tangential, but relatively close. And then you wake up 10 years later and you realize that you kind of went off on all these little rabbit trails. Are there sort of rubrics or decision-making criteria or like statements of values? Here are frameworks that we can use to kind of evaluate this and just kind of avoid those sort of subtle pivots that could potentially take you down a bad direction. Is there anything, sort of formal that the team uses to kind of keep itself honest that way?
We do use guiding principles around innovation. They're probably more tactical than what you're describing.
Okay.
I think it's firm strategy at the top level that helps make those guardrails. I also think we've got a really strong committee of very senior leaders that help jump in when we're making some big shift in innovation.
Yeah.
They don't get down in the weeds. It's not that kind of oversight. We have that kind of oversight, but we don't use obviously senior leaders for that. And then, that I think that keeps us honest. I think we're also pretty good at unpacking where it hasn't worked well. And if I think back over the last decade, there's definitely some things that didn't, impact perhaps our overall annual performance, but a couple things that we explored and thought, that's not really in our wheelhouse. Let's not do that again.
I want to dig a little bit into portfolio design, and that's something that a lot of folks talk about when they're trying to kind of be innovative, is to kind of embrace a portfolio approach. It's something that we do ourselves. For us, it came from our background in venture, but I know there's a whole bunch of different sort of views on it. How do you think about portfolio design? So things like allocation, the balancing, maybe more incremental type innovations versus more transformational type of stuff. How do you approach building or constructing that portfolio?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it, and I'm a huge advocate of the portfolio theory, is that at KPMG, it's really multidimensional. So for example, it's the build, buy, live strategy, right? And the fact that we do the combination of those three things as opposed to going just down a path of one.
Yeah.
But it's also other dimensions. So for example, dimensions of the network. It is really, really important for us to have relationships with startups and accelerator networks because it informs us on what we're doing. Sometimes we identify targets we want to acquire, and sometimes we identify businesses that we want to jump in and make, small, medium, or very large investments in. But it can't just be the startup community. We have to be tied to, those big enterprise global companies, and then all the companies in between. So it's that across the board perspective. I think the other, again, dimension of taking a portfolio approach is we do big innovation work streams, but we also do what is kind of on the ground level with our more junior team members. We try to innovate in really small ways as well, because it's amazing how that will bubble up and springboard an idea that there's no way we would have seen at the 50,000 foot level.
How about from sort of a governance perspective, for lack of a better word? I mean, you've got thousands and thousands of people all kind of doing, to a greater or lesser degree, but trying to kind of do these micro innovations. And in terms of determining, you said, you have sort of, it sounds like you have some software systems or some other types of systems that kind of help bubble that stuff up. But is there a formal process or like stage gating types of criteria for which things you maybe roll out more broadly or become, embedded into kind of KPMG's sort of larger DNA? How do you think about that side of things?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because innovation really happens in all parts of our, very large U.S. firm, not just in my group, which is innovation. In my group, when we make a investment of dollars in some way, that is absolutely well governed with stage gates. We have as I said, a committee of very senior leaders that represent all aspects of the firm who help make decisions really about whether we're going to spend the money or stop spending the money. And that works really well. We try not to put too much governance in, as I said, the grassroots activity or the innovation that's happening out in the functions. If you think about it, we have innovation that's happening out on engagements every day. Rather than trying to govern it, I think we're more concerned around trying to capture it. Right. So when you have a team, for example, it's a transfer pricing team, and you've got someone on the team that says, I think there's a way that we could use a complex analytical program, or maybe we could automate just a piece of this, but we really could do it in a better way. Once that engagement is done, my fear is that that's lost. And that's not taken into every transfer pricing engagement. And so there's governance on the big bets, but for the more the grassroots, we're really just trying to gather those insights and share them out.
I know you're interested in sort of the politics side of innovation and how the myriad ways that that folks can sort of derail great ideas. What are some of the more common things that you see, and maybe suggestions for how other teams can try to navigate that stuff successfully?
Yeah, it's not invented here syndrome. It's a real thing. I was at the Innovation Leader Conference in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and we talked about that in some of the groups with representatives from a very broad set of companies, and it was amazing how everyone related to this. There's sort of two parts to it. One is you end up with trying to launch something and people don't accept it. That's the antibody effect, right? But the other thing is you have groups that just don't talk to each other, and you end up innovating sort of the same thing or tangents of the same thing in many places, and it's so inefficient and slower than if you pulled together. So I know in the benchmark report, which I think you saw that was just published, it was an overwhelming percentage, 52% of people saying that this was the biggest impediment, was the politics, the turf wars, and that sort of thing. It's hard to build consensus. It's a balancing act. If you spend all your time building consensus, you're going to lose market speed. But if you plow ahead too fast and people don't buy in, you'll never launch because you'll get shot down before you can. So some of the things we do to avoid what I call the foot draggers, the ones that just slow you down, is trying to find that common agenda. Articulating what's in it for them. One thing that I talk a lot about is don't expect people to jump in and help you with your innovation area for no reason. Everybody is running around with their task lists and packed schedules. You got to articulate what's in it for them and what they're going to learn from it or how they may benefit down the road. That sounds really obvious, but sometimes we don't do enough of it. And then the real differentiator for us is that CEO and executive committee top-down support. That gives us a lot of buffer and permission to do what we want to do.
That makes sense. When you're talking about more junior, again, kind of equipping some of the more junior team members that don't have a lot of political clout, I think when folks throw out the word incentives, their mind often goes to monetary, right? And there's a lot of people inside of an organization that don't necessarily have the power to provide that, or a particular initiative just it's not a direct sort of economic kind of benefit. So what are some of the other types of incentives that people should be thinking about when they're trying to kind of appeal and recruit sort of internal allies that they can kind of appeal to as sort of upside for them getting involved?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different activities that we do. This isn't exactly at the grassroots level, but for example, if you were to file an application for a patent, a trademark, or a copyright, that gets our national attention. We just received a utility patent, and we teed it up. So our CEO is spending time with the partner that led that. It's that important. So you can't get better recognition than your CEO, having a meal with you and thanking you for doing what you did.
Yeah.
Other things that we have done have been really trying to celebrate the success. So the entire teams, we do monetary awards, spot awards. Those are great, particularly with the younger professionals. We really are pretty liberal trying to share those and recognize, and not just telling someone you did something great and so here's your spot award, but announcing it to the whole group, because it's not just encouraging that one individual, but telling that whole team or department or network, this is the kind of behavior that we really celebrate.
Along the same lines around incentives and maybe some of the tension there, you mentioned automation a little while back. I would imagine in specifically in professional services that there would be a tension there around, on the one hand, leveraging automation can increase scale and can improve margin and all of that kind of stuff. And when you're more junior, the incentives are a lot in alignment because you're doing a lot of that delivery work. But maybe when you get kind of more senior to the partner level or something like that, that there might be some hesitation, either because it'll push down prices and therefore their book of business, or some of those kinds of tensions. Is that a problem that you think professional services firms run into in terms of balancing the need for kind of efficiency improvements and billings, or is that not really an issue?
Yeah, the reality that professional services, particularly public accounting, that parts of the things that we have traditionally done for clients are being commoditized or being eliminated with the advent of automation and machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, all of it. That is not something, I think, at least from KPMG's perspective, that we're worried about. In fact, quite to the opposite, we're embracing it. Sort of, thank goodness it's not about ticking and tying anymore. Yeah. I started out 24 years ago as an auditor, and I shudder at I'll use a phrase that I love from a colleague. We call it soul-crushing work. Nobody really wants to do that. Right. So instead of I think the younger professionals at KPMG being concerned that they're going to be out of a job because of all these enabling technologies that may start to do the tasks that they would historically be assigned, I think it's the opposite. I think they're super excited. I worry that we get these digital natives coming out of college, and that I worry that we're brainwashing them with our old methodologies. So I'm trying to do the opposite and give them access to the software and the programs where they can explore. And we're saying, you guys help us find a better way. It's almost like a reverse mentoring concept. The bigger issue is actually, at the senior partner level, saying we've got to let them do this. They have more to teach us than we have to teach them in some aspects of the engagement, right?
Yeah, that's really neat. It does seem a lot of professional service firms, I don't know if KPMG kind of fits the description. I would imagine it does to some degree, but there's this sort of up and out or pyramid type of sort of org structure. Are there, it sounds like you're not eliminating or, younger kind of positions, you're elevating them and getting them maybe to think more strategically faster, or maybe it's going to allow the average book of business per partner or whatever it is to grow considerably larger from a scale perspective. But are there any implications in terms of how ladders, sort of corporate ladders work inside of a professional services firm as a result of some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think there are some implications from that. When I started out as a professional in our audit practice, you looked at that audit partner as if he or she were the king or the queen in terms of the knowledge. I never thought I could be as smart as they are. And in some ways, that is still true today. Those partners have some amazing relationships and deep embedded trust with their clients. They are solving some really heavy challenges facing many very large organizations. And they're figuring out, but they can figure out the solutions, but they can't put the solutions into practice because the people on the ground have that technical skill. So we've been spending a lot of time ensuring that we can bridge that gap. And I'll give you one quick example that just happened earlier this week. So major news publication is connecting with KPMG to hear about something that we built, an enabling technology, and wants to have it demoed to them in one of our labs, one of our ignition centers. And I was reviewing this and saying, okay, who's on deck? Who's the team? The lead person is a senior associate who happens to be a young woman that I know, who I think is just awesome. Yeah. I love to talk with her because I learn something every time I do. Yeah. But so we have this huge sort of presentation that where we're going to be quoted and published, and it's a pretty important moment. And who are we putting forward? That young professional. So It's interesting because we've shifted, and I see a lot more training at younger ages now, because we know these digital natives can describe how we're building the things in a way that some of our partners or more senior professionals just can't do. But we have to train them up to have those public speaking skills and to have a little bit of the confidence and the presence. So it's this really interesting dynamic, and I think there's a huge opportunity as we continue to further bridge this gap. Our success is just going to be phenomenal.
Changing gears a little bit, you mentioned that innovation benchmarking study, which was pretty interesting. From your perspective, what was the most surprising thing maybe that you learned from the most recent study that you all did?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of findings that made sense, and it was interesting to see the specific data support those findings. But there weren't a lot of things that I went, oh, wow, that was totally shocking. I never expected that. So, for example, the challenges around politics and turf wars, we can understand that. And it's great that we now have empirical evidence to show that. But the thing that was surprising to me was the percentage increase in the transformational efforts. So transformational as opposed to something that's adjacent or just incremental. Yeah. And it wasn't a big jump. So last year it was 20%. This year it was 25%. For the role model companies, in other words, companies that are more mature in their innovation processes, that number actually went up to 35%. So this doesn't seem like a really big difference. But what I noticed was that many of the participants, if part of the report talked about some of the things companies have stopped doing or slowed down, and there was a lot of acknowledgement that third horizon, those really long-term efforts that take time to get to market, that there's less tolerance for that now. So put those two data points together, more transformational activities. So the companies are taking bigger risks, but at the same time, they're looking at maybe more Horizon 2 or Horizon 1, so they're expecting faster results. The combination of those two data points was really interesting, and I think indicative of just the vast disruption we see across the board in the market.
What do you take away from that in terms of part of the reason I think that Horizon 3 is sort of named that, and why they kind of suggest that is you see it in startup world and SaaS businesses and otherwise. I mean, the overnight success is usually a 10-year. It's a 10-year journey, and venture assumes a 10-year time horizon in terms of determining outcomes. It seems like putting those two data points together, it sounds like there might be maybe a misunderstanding of how long it takes for some of those initiatives to see fruit. Is that fair, or what did you take away from that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to unpack without digging into sort of individual companies and individual strategies. And I think it would be interesting to do that. But I think it's it's indicative of the increased pressure.
Yeah.
The stakes are just getting higher. I don't think we're seeing massive business model shifts at the largest of companies. But in some of those mid-tier companies where the fringes of their business is eroding from the startups and some of those ventures, they're the ones that are starting to take the bigger risk to try to get faster results and maintain a speed of growth and not lose their market share.
Yeah.
That's my assumption. Of course, we didn't in the survey. We didn't ask questions in that way.
Sure.
So,
well, and I imagine too there might be even differences around how one interprets adjacent versus transformational in and of itself. So, I mean, what some might consider to be transformational might be much less risky inside of another organization. I wonder if that's part of it too. One of the things I thought was interesting was part of portfolio theory as applied to innovation is that you don't know which initiatives are going to succeed and which ones aren't. But this idea of failing fast, that kind of became a very common trope within that sort of universe. And it was related to, if you're going to fail, you might as well fail quickly. But one of the things you all found was that was not something that at least in your role model companies, that was valued, or that they found to be a particularly important lesson. Why do you think that was? And maybe what did you learn instead that the role model companies did find moved the needle?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I personally don't love the term fail fast. If you're going to fail, is failing faster or failing better? I guess the argument is better to know what's happening more quickly than in a slow way. KPMG is a great example of what I think we saw with some of the survey respondents from the benchmark survey. We talk more about pivoting fast and learning fast. And I know that's sort of semantics, but the reality is our teams don't want to talk about failing.
Yeah.
And we want to analyze it in order to learn, but we don't really want to dwell on failure. And it's not something that we really celebrate. There has been this sort of concept, I think, in the press about celebrating failure. And what we found at KPMG, and I think was indicated in the report from the other participants, was that doesn't drive the innovative culture that we want. It's focusing on having that clear strategy, focusing on having top-down support is just more important than talking about failing fast.
Got it.
So we try not to get stuck around those terms.
I see. Got it. You mentioned the build by ally and the recent example of the acquisition that you all made. One of the big pitfalls that we've seen in the past is when you're trying to fold something back into the mothership, whether that was an idea that was incubated inside of a labs kind of group or skunkworks type of group, or when you're making an acquisition, kind of the propensity for organ donor rejection seems to be pretty common. What do you think are some of the reasons are for that? And maybe what are some of the things that you all do to try to increase the likelihood of success when you are trying to fold that back into the larger organization?
Yeah, I think the issue is we have in a very positive way, such a strong culture in a way of approaching things. But when we acquire companies, it's because they're different. It's because they have something that we don't have. And so the fear is that in a short amount of time, that small entity in the big enterprise of KPMG loses its own uniqueness that we were hoping to absorb, not overtake. I think that's part of it, and it's hard. We fight to incubate business. We incubated our data and analytics business, which is called the Lighthouse, for a long time. To ensure that it had the permissions to approach the market and to develop in different ways than perhaps what was traditional for KPMG. But rolling things back out into the business is something we call graduations. and they're really difficult.
Yeah.
I think this is an area we've worked really hard and have improved a lot around. My belief is that if you're doing the innovation in the right way, there shouldn't really be a rolling back out into the business. There should be this sort of organic merging of things. And one of the things that we do is we try to graduate mature parts of an area of innovation a part at a time, as opposed to just this, hard flipping of something over the transom and hoping that it lands softly on the other side.
Yeah, totally. One of the related, you mentioned kind of incubating these things. One of the things that we've seen in the past has been sort of assessing performance of these initiatives. And there are obviously differences between what you're doing in the core and then these very nascent initiatives that are going to, again, sort of take time to sort of see fruit. How do you assess them differently, and maybe, or do you assess them differently? And if so, is there any advice that you would give to organizations in terms of giving things, like your Lighthouse initiative or things like that, the breathing room and the air cover that they need when they're going through kind of that ugly duckling phase, and it's hard to tell what this thing is ultimately going to be, while still kind of measuring them and holding them to some sort of standard for making progress?
Yeah, I love the term ugly duckling phase. I might use that myself. We evaluate everything in some way. So at the work stream level, or the sort of the area, and then at a major sort of big investment level as well. I have a real personal feeling around how you evaluate things. We use a lot of balanced scorecards. It's a lot of quantitative measures, but the qualitative measures are super important. And it's really something we've worked hard to get our leadership to understand, that if we're investing for something that's truly Horizon 3 and long-term, we can't talk about return on investment. By default, if we're getting a return within 12 months, was it really transformational?
Right.
I think you would have to say no. Right. And so making sure that we've got the right expectations aligned with the right horizon is the way that we do it at KPMG. We really look hard at the results of all of those near-term activities, because we're expecting them to turn quickly. But we have a much different approach to things that are farther out. We definitely identify success. We identify the milestones and the stage gates. But we don't get into the real monetary projections until we're farther through that innovation development cycle. I think a lot of leaders get hung up on how much is this going to make us? How much is this going to save us? And that can really erode some of the development if you are only focused on that.
Yeah. One of the things that we've found, not universally true, but it seems like a lot of the sort of lean startup-y type of techniques lend themselves really well to kind of Horizon 1, Horizon 2 type stuff. So, customer development or design thinking exercises and customer journeys and all that kind of stuff. But some of this transformational stuff seems like it often happens as a result of a new technology kind of coming out, and folks really trying to wrap their head around what this thing even could do, and almost like a solution in search of a problem, but not necessarily in a bad way, but there's a lot of carnage there. I think of like blockchain probably being a really good example of that right now, where maybe in 2018, everybody was super psyched about it and said it was going to change everything. And in you fast forward to 2019, and I think there's this hunt kind of in the dark a little bit still, where folks are they know that there's something there, but they don't know what it is yet. And they're trying to kind of figure that out. So when you're an organization that's wanting to invest in something like that, how do you advise them to kind of poke around those emerging technologies where you probably have to staff up in some competencies that you don't already have? You have to kind of position it in a way that doesn't look like you're just playing with toys, and it's not just lighting money on fire, but there's a hope at least that there's something kind of at the end of that tunnel. How do you think about that side of the thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think blockchain is an excellent example. And it probably applies to all emerging technologies. The technology itself isn't the solution.
Right.
And when we are asked by a client, and it's usually to bid on something, here's our problem statement. Please tell us how you could implement a blockchain or distributed ledger for us, and here are the parameters. That's usually not the type of work that we want to do. That's not really business enhancing and game changing. It's as you said, it's sort of that nail looking for a hammer, or whatever the phrase, hammer looking for a nail. Yeah. Sticking with blockchain, a great example as a type of technology that is one way in which you could solve a problem.
Yeah.
But you have to have the ability to come at the problem with that design thinking mindset, or that there could be a lot of different ways we could solve it. We've had a lot of clients approach us and say, we think we need blockchain because we're looking for the immutability and the trust. And we've told them the current processes that you're trying to replace with blockchain, you're going to spend a lot of money, and it's not really going to be that game changing for you. But we understand that you've got this problem. Let's provide a couple other scenarios where technology can help you, but maybe it's not. Distributed ledger is not the right thing for that.
Yeah.
And then we have lots of times that clients come to us with a problem. It's an auto manufacturer that has a supplier parts, problem, a lot of different players, and they don't know how to set up a better system. And blockchain is perfect for that.
Yeah.
It's perfect for that. Some of the contract management and super applicable things, but it's just one component of a bigger solution.
In terms of emerging technology or things that would be considered emerging tech, specifically as it relates to professional services, I know we've talked about automation already. What do you think the professional services firm of 2030 looks like, and what are some of the things that you think emerging tech is going to potentially be able to enable there?
Yeah, that's a great question. 2030 is a long way out.
Yeah.
We may be teleporting by then. I don't know.
2025,
2025. Yeah. I think that a lot of our traditional services will be automated. I think we'll be doing what I like to call the higher purpose work. I do think that our offering, our asset is our people. Yeah. And I see this already. The skill sets of our teams, and I suspect this is true across the board with public accounting firms, is changing dramatically. The number of data scientists that we have, and there's so many phenomenal specialized degrees coming out of universities these days. I really think the mix of our people is going to change dramatically. I don't think there'll be an emphasis on being a CPA. It's not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And part of it, I think, is because a lot of auditing, as companies become more automated, can be system driven.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why it's been so manual is companies continue to have tremendous manual processes in their back office and finance functions. At the end of the day, how the numbers get into the books is humans are tweaking them. Before that happens, and as long as that continues, we've got to come at it understanding what the humans are doing.
Yeah.
So the more our clients automate, the more we will automate, and on it goes. I do think that processing speed is going to change a lot. And when you think about whether it's quantum or 5G, the advent of that is really going to change the whole game. And that's going to be, I think, really exciting to see.
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom what that's going to look like. But yeah, it is super exciting. Well, this was fantastic. I really enjoyed this conversation. For folks that are looking to learn more, either about what you're up to or what about what your group is up to, where can I send them?
Absolutely, kpmg.com, and happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. I'm under Innovation Boss.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, again, Fiona, thank you so much for taking the time. Really enjoyed this. A lot of our audience is in kind of professional services in various areas, so I think that they're going to get a ton of value out of this. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Sean. I really enjoyed it.
My guest today was Fiona Grandi. For more ideas on how to transform your own organization, visit us at www.digintent.com, and we'd love a review on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.